How are you? Everything okay? So I'll be talking about MySQL today, but this talk is not about JSON fields. I'll be covering it, but it's not the main item on the schedule because there's a lot of good talks out there, mostly from Oracle itself, covering how to use JSON fields, how to extract, create indexes. But I want to show you some stuff that was released with 5.7 and people are not talking about, sometimes comes to my blog because they found an error and they don't know how to fix it. So this is me. I'm a data engineer. What does it mean? I am the bridge between the engineering team, the data layer, business. It's like what DevOps does with infrastructure and the engineers. That's what I do with the data layer. So storage engines, MySQL, Postgres, MongoDB, whatever you want to use to storage, I can help you architect and storage the best way possible for your application. You can reach me on Twitter. I have open DM message, so you don't need to follow me if you want to ask me something. That's my website. And that's, as Sean said, that's my second year in Laracon. I'm really, really thankful for that. And let's start. So what's to expect of this? I'm going to be talking about online DDL changes, SQL modes, and generated columns. JSON data type just a bit, and about the new performance schema for MySQL called SYS schema. What are the online DDL changes? Well, DDL actually means data definition language. You do every day. When you do your migration on Doctrine, Laravel, or even when you do your alter table or create table, that's data definition language. And MySQL handles that in two ways, either in place or copy. What does it mean? If it is in place, you can rename an index, you can rename a table. It's mostly metadata change. It's not actually changing the table content itself. It's only changing the definition. It's a fast operation. It doesn't take milliseconds usually. And even if your table has 100 gigabytes on it, it's going to take seconds at most. It's fast. But there are also the copy operation. And that one, it's the problem for most people that use 5.5. I did a poll yesterday on Twitter, and about 25% still use 5.5. And if you need to do an alter table, you know how sufferable that is because it takes hours. I got one time 2 days to do an alter table. Yes, when you change, for instance, integer for big int, you're doing a copy operation. How MySQL does that? It creates a new table with your new definition, copies the data from the old table to the new one, drops the old table, and rename it. So it's mostly reading and writing on disk, which we learned since programming that disk operations are costly. SQL modes. It's actually how the database is going to behave. You're going to tell it, for instance, you have a not null number, a not null column, and it's an integer. On 5.5, if you try to insert something, it becomes a 0. It's like how PHP handles undefined variables, but they change. In 5.6, they added strict unstable, no engine substitution. I'm going to explain that in the future. And on 5.7, they add more stuff. And it's hard to read, so I did this one. Quick rundown. The items with the asterisk, they're being deprecated, which means in future versions of MySQL, they will be removed and will be already into the strict table, turns table. Strict turns table means the following. I have a column that can have at most 100 characters, and I'm trying to insert 50. What MySQL usually does, truncate it, and you have 10 characters there. But if you have that enabled, it gives you an error. No strict, no engine substitution tells you the following. Usually we use or InnoDB or MySQL, correct? And there are other engines there. There's one called TokuDB, who knows? So TokuDB handles more big data, has fractal indexes. It's pretty cool. But for instance, if you're creating a schema and your default engine is InnoDB, and you say, I'm going to create a table that uses TokuDB, but you don't have TokuDB installed, what MySQL would do before, it would create a table as InnoDB, would ignore your definition for TokuDB. But now it gives you an error. That's why it has no engine substitution. The other ones are more simple, except the only full group by. There is no more 0 dates. 0, 0, 0, 0, it's not a year. 0, 0 is not a month, not even a day. And now it handles that way. If you are creating a date and you don't define what the default value is, it's going to give you an error. It's not going to insert 0, 0, zeros anymore, which is good. Because data consistency should be your main concern. It's where your business model and value are. And 0 is not a date. And for finishing it, error for division by 0. Well, Oracle did this kind of not in the right way, let's say. It only works on inserts and updates. So if for some reason you're doing a division and an insert and update, it's going to fail, and if it is divided by 0. But you can like select 100 by 0, and it's going to give you now. It works. So they didn't implement it fully yet. What all this means is that Oracle is trying to reach the same patterns as Postgres does, to make it more strict, to make it the database work for you and not allow invalid data to get in. Example, I have this table that I created. It's quite similar to the one that if you use Laravel migration, that user table that creates, it just doesn't have the password and reset password fields, I think. So all my fields are not null. I have a default value for timestamp. So if you don't tell it, it's going to insert the current timestamp. And I have a first name and last name as varchar. Email, in my example, it's not a unique key. There are, trust me, a lot of business there that email is not unique. So on my example, it's going to be that way. And I want to find what records have email as duplicated emails. In Eloquent, you would do it like that. You have group by email, and you count down the rows and filter it. That's why you have the count greater than 1. It only filters the rows that have more than 1 email per user ID. Now, this is on 5.6. How does MySQL knows I want to bring Marina for that email and not, I don't know, John? If you look at the documentation, they say there is no guarantee which record is going to come because you didn't tell it. And if you execute that on 5.7, you get this. This actually, it's how most databases work. It's in database theory. And they are doing that way. So let's look at it. Store user's ID. It's saying that expression 1 on select list, it's not in group by. You don't need, why? Asterisk, when you put the asterisk on a database, it's going to read which columns in the order you put it in. ID is the first column, so ID is not specified there, hence I don't know which ID should I bring. That's what it's saying. It's how they put it on the documentation. But honestly, it's hard to understand, in my opinion. If you don't know databases already, if you're just a developer and run it today, or you're just gonna look and say, I don't understand what's happening. So this is my translation of that. This happens because you're trying to bring results into a row, into a single row, which can have more than one, and you don't tell the data, you should tell the database which one you want to bring. For that, we use aggregators. Aggregators are count, sum, minimum, maximum, average. You have to use those. So the query doesn't look pretty after that, and that's the mode that's known only for group by. It comes enabled by default. And if you upgrade your software from 5.6 to 5.7, and you have that kind of query, it's going to break your code. What I recommend is to look before there is a migration guide on the MySQL 5.7 documentation. This is pretty interesting. So when MySQL 5.7 was released, it was 5.7.9. So general availability was, oh my God, I can't see it. Was around October 2015. So you can see there's a flat line of people looking for how to disable it. And you can see there's a huge numerous curves of people searching for what this is, because they found on the error, they don't know what that is. And that's not new. That's on 5.6 was there, wasn't enabled. And you see around, I think around March, AWS, those big companies started supporting 5.7, and at the same time, people, instead of fixing their codes, they started looking how to disable it, because it's how it is. It's how it is, because it's easier for me to disable the tests on my code, isn't it, instead of fixing what's broken? So it's the same thing for me as a data engineer. If you disable that, you're just hurting yourself. Now, for legacy applications, I understand if you have that huge monolith and you have to, I had to handle 5,000, 10,000 lines of code in one controller. I know how hard it is. So you can actually disable that kind of configuration, but if you're doing green code, I'm doing TDD, I'm doing BDD, I'm doing DDD, do the right way with the database too. Get a bit more worried. It's going to be worth it. Now, how do we solve that using Eloquent? Because this is a Laravel conference, so I want to solve that. This is the same query you use to get the duplicated emails. I translated it into SQL down. So I'm getting everything from the users table, grouping by email, where all the rows that I group by are higher than one. And it gets like this. I'm not using DB, I'm using Capsule, because when I did my code to test, I didn't usually, I just installed the Illuminate database package. I didn't install Laravel as a whole. So you can substitute that static call for DB. It is how it is on the Laravel documentation. And what's happening is, I'm telling to the database, I want to group all the users' ID together in a single column. I want you to bring the emails. The email, I don't need to put any aggregator on because it's on the group by. And I want you to count for me how many repeated records there are. So this is the SQL. For me, it's more easier that way to read it. So it's concatenating the user's ID. It's comma separated. Those are the emails that are repeated, and how many times they repeated itself. I use the faker library. Usually if you run only once, it doesn't repeat emails. So I had to run twice. That's why I only have 2. But that's how it works. That's how you solve on Eloquent. You need to use raw right now If you use the minimum or max that is there, it's going to do the select as a whole and try to filter in the PHP, and the result's not the same. Generated columns. Who here knows what a generated column is? Have you ever heard about virtual columns? Calculated columns. That's how the DBAs used to call it before. There are two types. Postgres, for instance, doesn't have generated columns. So yay, you're ahead. But when you wanted to do something that was virtual in MySQL before, or in Postgres today, you need to create a view. Now, what Postgres is ahead of us is that it materializes the view first, which means that the view, it's kind of pre-warm. It's not calculated on the fly. And we have a virtual, which has no disk space whatsoever. It's calculated on the select and calculated on the before triggers, if you have any trigger in your table. It's an in-place creation. Remember when I told you about in-place? So if you create a virtual column, it's going to take milliseconds. It's not going to do a whole copy of your table. However, if you use stored columns, every time you do insert and update and change that value, it's going to change on the column itself. Uses disk space, and it does a copy operation. And you may think, this is not worth it, because when I create it, it's going to take forever, and I don't want to take forever. I just want it to be fast. But there are trade-offs, and technology is about trade-offs. So what they both have in common: they can be indexed. They can allow expressions to be used. For instance, you saw me use group concat to get the IDs, but you can use, in this case, not that kind of functions on MySQL, but operators, multiply, divide, subtract, add, the built-in functions for string. For instance, there is a bunch of them, left, right, and literals. If I want to just put a string there to appear every time, I can do that too. But this must be into the table domain. You cannot add subqueries into a virtual column, no matter if it's stored, no matter if it's virtual, because then you don't want a virtual column, you want a view. That's when you add your subqueries at. Good news is, Laravel supports it on the migrations. It's not in the documentation yet. I'm going to make the PR to help. But it's called a modifier. And usually to create a migration, we run artisan like that and create a code something like this. So what I have here, I'm creating the user's table. I want to concatenate the first name with the last name. That's going to be my virtual column. So you put virtual S and concatenate. WS means word separator, separated by a space, first name and last name. And I want it after last name. So that's for virtual. For stored, it's actually the same. Just changes that. It's the same syntax. You just need to do that. The default is virtual. If you don't tell MySQL what you want, it's going to create it virtual. Now, think with me for a minute. That's the SQL that's generated. The only difference, it's the stored here. How many times you change your name? Your real name, like when you get married, then you get divorced. In the US, you can change any time, but when you, I don't know, that's something that happens like 3 or 4 times in your life. And usually when people do on a website, they don't change that much. I mean, not on Twitter, I mean your real name. And on this case, I stored one is better because it's going to read that first and the complete name all the time. And sometimes you want to show that. And to calculate that on the fly, it's not good for performance. So on this case, the best trade-off, even though it may, if you have 1 million users, it's going to take a while to create the column, is to do a stored version instead of a virtual one. Other expressions. You can multiply a column for another. You can use to get string functions like I want the domain of an email. That's the expression that's going to get to you. I want to convert from Unix time, like when you have timestamps, for a readable date time for me to do operations better. And for searching into JSON fields. That's why generated columns are important. That's why I started with it. JSON. It's without a doubt the most commented feature of 5.7, in my opinion. It's great because I have a post where I'm against using text fields to store JSON. And mostly complains actually about 5.5, how it handles it. And they did it on a good way. They did it on a binary storage. So when you save a JSON field on the database, you're saving it binarily, which means you can access directly. You can convert your current text fields, if you upgrade MySQL, to JSON fields. And if you want to access it, looks like PHP for me there. That's the alias for the JSON extract. It's a search function inside JSON. As I said, I'm not going to go through all the JSON stuff that is out there. Just giving you some tips to how to index data there. So if you want to access a value, you do this. The problem with this, the value come as it is. If you have a string, it's going to come with quotes. If you have a URL, you are going to have the backslashes. If you have, I don't know, a special character, a break line, the break line is going to come. And you don't want to index that kind of stuff. So there's another way of doing that. However, before you convert text to JSON, you must think really carefully, because it's a copy operation. As I explained, it's really slow. And all rows must be valid. If one row doesn't have a JSON field valid, no, it's converted to empty. But if it doesn't have, if you have a syntax error, it's not going to work. What I recommend to you, there is I forgot to put it in the slide, there is a function called JSON valid. You can validate before you're doing the upgrade if the field that you're trying to convert, it's valid or not for conversion. And indexes are only possible through generated columns. That's the only way you can do that. That's why I spend that much time explaining to you. So that's the Twitter user table. I went full mode, how you say, stalker on my friends. And I use the Twitter API to get the people I follow and get the response API and save as a JSON. And I save the screen name and the ID string from Twitter separately, just for me to be able to query easily, and created time and updated time. I only have an index on screen name because that's where I'm searching for. And ID string is already a unique index, so no need to add another one. So this is how it looks like. That's a very, very compressed response from Twitter. It's way bigger than JSON. You see that I jumped from 7 to 59 The roles that's the Laracon EU Twitter. And I wanted to know where my friends are from, where they are. So I wanted to index the location. And I also wanted to index their avatar picture. Yeah, I told you I'm going full stalker mode. And I wanted to also index their avatar picture. So I did this. I created 2 virtual columns. Remember that I told you that is a way to remove the slashes, strings, the slashes of special characters? Oh my God, sorry. Is the JSON quote? I don't even can see it. It's the JSON quote. So what's happening there, I am modifying the JSON that I am extracting through that response arrow location, which it is on that JSON there. That's how you access it. And I'm saving a store because, as I said, as your name, I know that a lot of people that change locations all the time on Twitter, but it's not how much you change your description, in my opinion. So I decided to do stored. However, people change image profiles at least once a month, at least the people I follow, except Frank. And you can see the time that it took to do the change. It took 2 seconds for 1,200 people. I don't follow 1,200 people, by the way. I got other tweeters and got from correlate from someone else. And it took 2 seconds just to create the column. And for a data set that small, that's slow. Now, when I created the virtual column, I completed in 151 milliseconds. Now, a parenthesis here, that's my local machine. That's not our server. Probably is way faster on a dedicated server than it is on my machine. So a pinch of salt, just the proportion here that I want to show. It doesn't say it's going to take that long. OK? So in the end, I have this table. You can see here, stored, generated, and virtual generated. When you do a describe, you're going to see that. And I added an index on location because I'm going to search for location. I told you. I want to know where you are. And the image URL is just to bring in the result. So that would be something like this. See, Frank, you're there. And that's not the complete JSON there because, it's big. Just to show you how easy it is to stalk someone on Twitter using JSON, And one of the features that me, as a data engineer, likes the most about MySQL is the sys schema. The sys schema, there's a difference between database and schema. For MySQL, database is a schema. For Postgres, for instance, one database can have n schemas. So you could have more than one schema on the same database. That happens with MySQL. So it actually is another database that's created and added to your cluster or your server. This is actually presented since the 5.6. Exists since 5.6 version. There's a link there if you want to install on your server. And by default, comes installed on 5.7. However, it doesn't come enabled. And it shouldn't be enabled by default on your production server because there are levels of debugging that you want to put in your database that can take a toll on performance. And sometimes you're gathering statistics where you should be serving results. So you only do that, like for instance, oh, I'm having this spike of 10,000 users, all of a sudden this page is slow, I don't know why. You enable it. Take it at most 3, 4, 5 minutes, and you're gonna see where your bottlenecks are. So this is a dashboard on the performance table. It comes with the MySQL Workbench. I know, it's not good, but it's better than nothing. Actually, it's the best performance tool analysis that I ever had, even compared to the ones in the market. Not giving names here. But you can see how many connections you have, how the traffic is, how many selects, how many updates, how many creates, and how the buffer for InnoDB is. Mine is not good because, as I told you, it's my virtual machine. I didn't optimize it. But the lower that is, the better that it is, the buffer. On the other hand, the table open cache, the higher that is, the better it is, because it means it's in memory. So you search on memory, do not search on disk. So what I can do with it, this is just the most 5 examples that I use it. As I told you, is a database. And as a database, you can query inside of it. Workbench comes with some already responses to you. And the one that I use the most and most generic ones is the high-cost SQL statements. You see that's kind of weird, the X dollar there. It's actually a view that it's a convention that Oracle decided to use to put on a more friendly way to gather statistics from a table that already exists. So you can see high-cost SQL statements. What does it mean? I have a query that's bringing me 2 million results. There's something wrong with it, probably. You forgot to do pagination somewhere. I have a query that's taking 10 seconds. Probably there is also something wrong with that. So you can see top 5% slower queries. Who is creating temporary tables? Now, when I say temporary tables, I don't say the statement create temporary table, because when you do a select on MySQL, it tries to calculate how big of the response is going to be if you're ordering it. And for that, it creates a temporary table in the background. And that's not good, usually. So it shows which queries are creating temporary tables. Indexes that you created and you're not using. Remember, too many indexes means that you're having probably slower speed than write. If it helps you with the read, but the write gets slower. And full table scans, somebody forgot to do a where, usually. And that's not very much friendly. That's the good God, yeah. That's, for instance, me. I told you that I created my own database for Twitter MySQL there. You can see the outer table that I did there. Was executed 4 times. And those numbers are big because they are in microseconds. So they're actually not that big. You can convert it. I think it's 10 minus 9, I don't know, a billion something to get it to milliseconds or 2 seconds. So you can convert it. If you're querying yourself, you're always going to get the results on microseconds. That's how exact it can be. You can see I/O, you can see buffer status. So if that's the kind of information that all those daemons that comes with, that you install on the PHP server, for instance, doesn't give you the statistics. I had a case where the culprit of the problem was FPM creating too many connections, and they were like, Gabby, the database is not handling it. It was like, and I looked at that dashboard before, and it was like 12 connections, 13 connections, and the CPU was 98%. I was like, no, it's not the database. I'm telling you. But that tool was saying it was the database. Okay. And now, just to finish, some small bites of what changed. There are some, if you're curious, you don't need to read the whole MySQL 5.7 documentation. They have a chapter called What's New and What's Removed, just that. It's like 20 pages long, just if you're curious. So passwords now can be expired. So if you create a user for someone, like I don't like giving read access to anyone on the database. I don't know what you're going to do with the database. So I can't put to expire the password. Remember that I told you about those strict modes? They are deprecated, which means on 5.8, 5.9, or even 6, they're not going to be available. Triggers now, and this one is dangerous, are supported for more than one trigger per event. Translation. Usually we have 3 types of events on a table. Insert, update, delete. You could only do 1 per event. Now can have multiples. And triggers can help you, but most times can harm you. Exceptionally, if you have tables with long rows and you do a lot of updates and you forget to disable the trigger and you freeze the database. That happens, not telling who did that. And year 2 was deprecated already on 5.6, and now it's no longer supported. So before that, year 2, until if you put it at year like 10, it would assume there was it was 2010. And if you put it a year like 55, it would assume it was 1955. It's kind of guessing it, and guessing is not good. So if you're gonna use a year field now, it must have 4 characters. It's going to be the full 4 characters of a year. So I know it's a lot of information. It's, as I said, not JSON specific only. The date part's really important, people. 0 is not a date. Fix your code, because it's gonna get worse. It's gonna get more strict and strict. And if you're in 5.5, you need to change to 5.6 first. You cannot upgrade directly to 5.7. And if you put it on 5.6, you already have a huge gain on performance, because you can install the CSS schema and see what's wrong. You, dev, on your own machine, see what's wrong with your code, see why it's taking too long. I know it's not the same as in production, but it already helps. So that's my Twitter. That's my website. I'm on IRC. I'm on IRC on the PHP Women channel, MySQL. And please rate my talk. And all of the information here are either on my website or in the MySQL documentation. Thank you.